Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. A widow's last hope human, my children will starve without you. Halcyon Station hung like a tarnished coin against the void, its once gleaming hull now dulled by years of neglect. The transport hub had become a waypoint for the desperate, those with nowhere else to go after the Confederacy's expansion left smaller worlds in ruins. Tomas Rivera moved through the crowded medical sector with practiced efficiency, his footsteps barely audible against the metal grating. The station's artificial day cycle was ending, casting long shadows through the corridor's strip lighting. His medical badge, scraped of its former military insignia, reflected dully as he passed beneath each light panel. "Last round's doc," called Warden Brock from his security station. Tomas nodded without stopping, just checking supply levels before curfew. The lie came easily now, after 3 years of exile on this forgotten outpost. Once he'd been Lieutenant Commander Rivera, decorated field surgeon for the Confederacy's 7th Medical Battalion. Now he was simply the doc, another disgraced officer serving out an unofficial sentence for disobeying orders that would have cost innocent lives. The refugee sector was quieter than usual tonight. Most had retreated to their makeshift shelters, converted cargo containers, and repurposed maintenance bays. Tomas slowed as he approached the old water reclamation unit at the sector's edge. Movement caught his eye, a shadow that didn't belong. "Medical personnel," he announced softly, one hand raised. "I'm not security." No response came, but the shadow shifted slightly. Tomas moved closer, caution tempered by curiosity. The station's spotty sensors often missed new arrivals, especially those who'd paid handsomely to bypass official channels. "I have supplies," he added, "food, medicine." A voice finally answered, soft, melodic, but strained with exhaustion. "We need neither charity nor capture." "Then what do you need?" Tomas asked, crouching to appear less threatening. The figure emerged partially from the shadows, a woman with skin the color of burnished copper, intricate markings visible along her temples and jawline. Palladian, Tomas realized. Their world had been one of the first to fall when the Confederacy expanded into the Nyxus sector. "A sanctuary," she said simply. Behind her, Tomas now saw two smaller figures, children clinging to her tattered cloak. One appeared no more than 7, the other perhaps 4. Their markings were less pronounced, suggesting mixed heritage. "I'm Tomas," he said, intentionally omitting his former rank. "Veda," she replied after a hesitation. "Veda Nix." Tomas kept his expression neutral despite his surprise. The Nix family had been planetary governors on Palladium before the occupation. If she was who she claimed, she was both valuable and hunted. "Your children need medical attention," he observed, nodding the younger child's labored breathing. "My son has respiratory inflammation from the transport conditions," Veda said. "We were in a cargo hold for 11 days. Tomas grimaced. "That's what was necessary," she finished, her eyes challenging him to judge her. "My medical bay is nearby," he said instead. "It's off the security grid, I can treat him there." Veda didn't move. "What payment do you require?" The question wasn't unusual in a place like Halcyon where nothing came freely. Tomas had heard similar queries countless times from desperate refugees. Some offered credits, others offered services. The truly desperate offered themselves. "Information," he said, "eventually when you're ready to share it." Her shoulders remained tense, but she nodded once. "Juno," she whispered to the older child, "stay close to me." The girl nodded, her large amber eyes never leaving Tomas. The younger boy coughed weakly. "What's his name?" Tomas asked as they began moving through the shadows toward the medical sector. "Dion," Veda answered, lifting the boy into her arms. "It means divine one in our language." Tomas led them through a maintenance corridor, bypassing the main thoroughfare where security cameras would record their passage. The medical bay was small, just 4 beds and basic equipment, but it was his domain, one of the few places on the station where his authority remained unchallenged. "Here," he said, pulling a privacy screen around one of the beds. "Lay him down." Veda hesitated only briefly before placing Dion on the bed. The boy whimpered, reaching for his mother even as Tomas began scanning him with a handheld diagnostic unit. "Pulmonary inflammation, elevated white count," Tomas muttered. "Oxygen saturation at 84%, he's fighting an infection." Can you help him? Veda asked, her composure cracking slightly. Tomas nodded, already preparing a nebulizer treatment. Yes, but you'll need to stay here at least overnight. The corridors are patrolled heavily after curfew. Juno spoke for the first time, her voice surprisingly steady for a child her age. Are you going to report us? Tomas looked at the girl, struck by the maturity in her question. No. Why not? She pressed. Your confederacy, I can tell by how you walk. Veda placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Juno. She's observant, Tomas said. That's a valuable trait. He turned to the medicine cabinet, retrieving antibiotics. I was confederacy, not anymore. As Dion's breathing treatment began taking effect, Tomas prepared a simple meal from his personal rations. Veda watched him with unmasked suspicion, but hunger eventually won over caution. They ate in silence, the hum of the station's environmental systems filling the space between them. You're right to be cautious, Tomas said finally. There are people on this station who would turn you in for the reward. And yet you won't, Veda stated, studying him. Why? Tomas considered the question. 3 years ago, he disobeyed direct orders to abandon a civilian hospital during the Battle of Nereus IV. That decision had saved 43 lives and ended his military career. Because some orders deserve to be broken, he said simply. Veda's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You were discharged. Dishonorably, he confirmed, though they called it a medical retirement in the official records, easier than admitting a decorated officer had gone rogue. Dion stirred in his sleep, coughing once before settling. Veda immediately moved to his side, checking his temperature with the back of her hand. The fever's breaking, Tomas assured her. He'll be stronger by morning. Veda nodded but remained by her son's side. Juno had curled up in a chair, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. You should rest too, Tomas suggested, offering Veda a blanket. I'll watch over them, she replied. Then we'll both watch, he said, settling into his desk chair. I have nowhere else to be. As station night deepened around them, Tomas observed the family he'd just harbored. Refugees were common on Halcyon, but political fugitives of Veda's standing were rare and dangerous to protect. Yet something about their presence felt right, like a piece of himself he'd lost on Nereus IV had suddenly returned. By morning, he knew decisions would need to be made. Security protocols, identification papers, ration allocations, the machinery of survival on a station that barely tolerated its legal residents. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of his medical bay, Tomas allowed himself to remember what it felt like to save lives that mattered. Veda's eyes met his across the dimly lit room, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They were strangers bound by circumstance, but in that moment they shared something rare on Halcyon Station: hope. The medical bay hummed with morning operations as Tomas checked Dion's vital signs. The boy's breathing had improved significantly overnight, the harsh wheeze replaced by the occasional soft cough. Beside the bed, Veda dozed in an uncomfortable position, her copper-toned fingers still wrapped protectively around her son's smaller hand. Your mother needs real rest, Tomas said quietly to Juno, who was wide awake and watching him with unwavering attention. She doesn't sleep much, the girl replied matter-of-factly, not since the evacuation. Tomas nodded, understanding all too well how survival instincts could override basic needs. He'd experienced similar patterns after Nereus IV, nights spent staring at ceilings, replaying decisions, wondering which ghosts might have been saved by different choices. I brought breakfast, he said, offering her a nutrient bar. Not much, but it's better than station rations. Juno accepted it cautiously. You're helping us, why? Before Tomas could answer, the medical bay door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. He moved quickly, positioning himself between the door and the refugee family as Nadine Akafer stepped inside. The station's supply coordinator held a datapad in one hand, her expression shifting from professional to confused when she spotted Juno. Doc, Nadine's eyes narrowed. Didn't realize you had patients. Emergency admission, Tomas replied smoothly. Maintenance worker's family, Section D respiratory issues. Nadine glanced at her datapad, not seeing it in the overnight log. System glitch, Tomas shrugged. I'll file the paperwork retroactively. For a tense moment, Nadine seemed ready to challenge this explanation. Then her shoulders relaxed, and she placed the datapad on his desk. Your requisitions came through, half of what you asked for as usual. She lowered her voice. Listen, Tomas, Commander Reeves is conducting surprise inspections. Started in manufacturing, moving this way, thought you should know. Tomas kept his expression neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in his mind. Appreciate the heads up. After Nadine left, Veda was instantly alert, fear evident in her eyes. We need to leave. Not yet, Tomas cautioned. Dion needs another treatment and moving during day cycle is too risky. He began gathering supplies, mind racing through contingencies. We need documentation for you, temporary IDs at minimum. Forge them, Veda asked, surprised. Create them, Tomas corrected. I still have limited medical override privileges. I can register you as refugees from Harkin's moon. They lost their central database in the solar flares last month. No one can verify identities from there. Veda studied him, uncertainty written across her features. This puts you at risk. I've been at risk since the moment I chose my oath over my orders, he replied, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. While Tomas worked at his terminal, fabricating a medical history and temporary identification, Juno helped Dion sit up for his breathing treatment. The boy seemed stronger, his eyes brighter as he watched the adults with quiet intensity. You were an artist, Tomas observed, noticing Juno sketching on a scrap of medical packaging with a stylus she'd found. She was studying at the Palladian Arts Conservatory, Veda said softly, before the occupation. Juno didn't look up from her drawing. I want to remember everything so I can recreate it someday. Tomas felt something twist in his chest, the familiar ache of witnessing resilience in the face of overwhelming loss. He'd seen it in field hospitals across 3 systems, that stubborn human insistence on creating beauty even as worlds burned around them. Your temporary IDs are processing, he said, returning to practicalities. I've assigned you quarters in Section G, repurposed storage units but private. It's registered under my medical authority as quarantine housing. And when someone questions that, Veda challenged. Then I'll find another solution, Tomas replied simply. By midday, Dion was strong enough to stand. Tomas provided them with station-issue clothing, drab but anonymous and basic necessities. The boy looked almost comical in his oversized jumpsuit, the sleeves rolled up multiple times to free his hands. We'll move during shift change, Tomas explained. 15 minutes of reduced surveillance while security teams rotate. When the time came, he led them through service corridors, avoiding the main thoroughfares. Juno matched his stride perfectly, while Veda carried Dion despite Tomas's offers to help. Their new quarters were Spartan, 2 narrow beds, a sanitation unit, and a small food preparation area, but secure. The door locks from inside, Tomas demonstrated. This panel connects directly to my medical bay. Press here if you need me. Veda touched the panel tentatively. You've done this before. It wasn't a question, but Tomas answered anyway. Twice, a family from Eridani, a political dissident from New Terra. He paused. Neither stayed long. What happened to them? Juno asked. They found passage off station, Tomas said, omitting the complications, the close calls, the bribes that had depleted his savings. As will you when the time is right. That evening, after completing his regular duties, Tomas returned with additional supplies, real food, not synthesized rations, purchased from a trader who asked no questions. As they ate, the tension that had defined their interactions began to soften. You were high-ranking, Veda noted, observing the way he automatically checked sightlines, positioned himself with tactical advantage. Not just a field medic. Lieutenant Commander, Tomas confirmed. 7th Medical Battalion deployed to 14 conflict zones over 11 years. And Nereus IV, she prompted. Tomas set down his fork. How did you? Your nightmares, Veda said softly. You spoke the name while you dozed at your desk last night. The memory surfaced unbidden, the civilian hospital, the evacuation order that came too late, his choice to stay behind with patients too critical to move. The Confederacy had deemed them acceptable losses in a strategic withdrawal. He had not. I made a choice, he said simply. It cost me my career, but I saved 43 civilians. And now you're saving 3 more, Veda observed. Trying to, Tomas amended. Dion, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke. Were you scared? The question caught Tomas off guard. Yes, he admitted, seeing no reason to lie to the child. I was terrified. But you did it anyway, Dion said, his young face serious. Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid, Tomas told him. It means you do what's right despite the fear. Later, as Tomas prepared to leave, Veda walked him to the door. You never asked who we are, she said, why we're running. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready, he replied. She studied him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting the dim corridor lighting. My husband was Counselor Nix, chief diplomatic liaison to the Confederacy. He discovered evidence of atrocities on occupied worlds, mass relocations, resource stripping, cultural erasure. He compiled records prepared to present them to the Galactic Assembly. Her voice remained steady, but Tomas saw her hands trembling. He was executed for treason 3 weeks ago. The children and I were scheduled for rehabilitation. The euphemism wasn't lost on Tomas. Rehabilitation centers were notorious final destinations. The evidence, he asked. Here, Veda touched her temple. And here. She reached for a pendant around her neck, a simple copper disc with Palladian script etched into its surface. Everything the Confederacy doesn't want known, preserved in quantum storage, enough to turn public opinion against them if it reaches the right hands. Tomas absorbed this information, understanding now the true danger of harboring them. This wasn't just about saving refugees, it was potentially about changing the course of the Confederacy itself. Tomorrow, he said finally, we'll talk about next steps. As he walked back toward his quarters, Tomas felt a curious lightness despite the gravity of his situation. For 3 years, he'd been going through motions, existing rather than living. Now, purpose had found him again. In the darkness of Halcyon Station's night cycle, surrounded by the hum of life support systems keeping thousands alive in the vacuum of space, Tomas Rivera made a silent promise to the family he'd just left, and to himself. This time, saving 3 lives might save countless more. He would not fail them. 1 week turned into 2. Tomas established a rhythm, dividing his time between regular medical duties and clandestine visits to Section G. With each passing day, Dion grew stronger, his lungs clearing, his voice becoming more confident. Juno filled the walls of their hideaway with intricate drawings, memories of palladium rendered in smuggled colored markers. Veda gradually let her guard down, though her eyes still darted to the door whenever footsteps passed in the corridor. Your son is quite the engineer, Tomas remarked one evening, watching Dion disassemble and rebuild a damaged diagnostic scanner with surprising dexterity. He takes after his father, Veda replied, a hint of pride breaking through her usual reserve. Farron could build anything. The mention of her executed husband still brought shadows to her face, but the raw pain seemed less jagged now. Tomas handed Dion a precision tool. The station's transport shuttle arrives tomorrow. I've been monitoring the manifest. There's a free trader vessel scheduled to dock for supplies. Veda looked up from the clothing she was mending. Free traders are notoriously unreliable. Captain Delia Quinn isn't, Tomas countered. She owes me for patching up her navigator after a run-in with Confederacy patrols last year. She's sympathetic to displaced persons. How sympathetic? Veda asked cautiously. Enough to consider passengers with special circumstances. Tomas lowered his voice, though they were alone. She runs the Edge Circuit, stops at Helios Station, Nova Refuge, and 3 non-Confederacy outposts before returning. Hope flickered in Veda's eyes, quickly tempered by practicality. The cost. Considerable, Tomas admitted. But I've been saving since I arrived here. Military pension reduced for dishonorable conduct, but still sufficient. Juno, who had been pretending not to listen, looked up from her drawing. Where would we go after? We can't keep running forever. The question hung in the air, complex and heavy with implications. Tomas had asked himself the same thing repeatedly in the sleepless hours between shifts. The Nix family couldn't simply disappear, not with the information they carried, not with the potential to expose Confederacy atrocities. There are still independent systems, he said finally. Places beyond Confederacy reach where the evidence could be presented to representatives from neutral worlds. And then what? Juno pressed, displaying the unflinching directness of a child who had seen too much to accept comforting lies. Then the truth does what truth always does eventually, Tomas replied. It forces change. The girl returned to her drawing unconvinced. Tomas couldn't blame her skepticism. The galaxy was vast, but power was concentrated, and the Confederacy's reach extended further every cycle. A sudden alert from Tomas's personal communicator broke the moment. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. What is it? Veda asked, immediately alert. Security alert, he said, skimming the message. Commander Reeves has ordered documentation verification for all non-essential personnel in sections E through H. His eyes met hers. They're looking for someone. Us, Veda whispered. Possibly, Tomas acknowledged, or it could be routine intimidation. Either way, we need to move you. Dion looked up from the scanner parts spread across his lap. Where? Medical sector, Tomas decided. There's a quarantine chamber used for contagion control. Self-contained, limited access. I can secure it with my override codes. They moved quickly, gathering only essentials. Juno hesitated over her drawings, torn between sentiment and practicality. Bring one, Tomas said gently, the most important one. She selected a sketch of her family standing before the Palladian central spire, its crystalline towers catching imagined sunlight. The rest she carefully rolled and placed beneath a loose floor panel. I'll come back for them, she promised the empty air. The station corridors were unusually active, with security personnel checking identification at major junctions. Tomas led them through maintenance passages, relying on knowledge gained during 3 years of exploring Halcyon's forgotten spaces. Twice they froze in darkness as patrol boots echoed nearby. When they finally reached the medical sector, Tomas's access panel flashed red. Override codes have been changed, he muttered, attempting a secondary sequence. They know, Veda stated, not a question but a conclusion. Not necessarily, Tomas countered, though uncertainty gnawed at him. Security protocols are updated regularly, sometimes without notice. The panel remained obstinately red. Tomas considered their options, each less appealing than the last. They couldn't return to Section G, they couldn't remain in the corridor. The quarantine chamber was sealed. Your quarters, Veda suggested suddenly. Tomas hesitated. That's the first place they'd look if they suspect me. Which is why it might be the last place they'd expect to find us, she reasoned. It was risky, perhaps foolishly so, but they had few alternatives. Tomas's personal quarters were Spartan but private, located in a section reserved for senior medical staff. The corridors there were monitored, but his credentials should still allow passage. They moved quickly, Dion now walking under his own power while Juno kept pace beside Tomas. Veda followed, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. The journey was tense but uneventful, and when Tomas's door finally slid shut behind them, the collective exhale was audible. It's not much, Tomas apologized, surveying his living space through their eyes. A bed, a desk, minimal personal effects. 3 years on Halcyon, and he'd accumulated little more than medical journals and a few items salvaged from his former life. A service medal he couldn't bring himself to discard, a holograph of his battalion before Nereus IV. It's safe, Veda countered, which was all that mattered. While the children explored the unfamiliar space, Tomas accessed his terminal, bypassing the official channels to tap into security feeds. What he saw confirmed his fears. Section G was being systematically searched, room by room. They have your descriptions, he said quietly to Veda. Not names but physical characteristics, someone recognized you. She absorbed this without visible reaction, though her hand moved instinctively to the copper pendant at her throat. How long until the free trader docks? 18 hours, Tomas replied. We need to hold position until then. Juno approached the terminal, studying the security feed with unsettling composure. What if they search here? They won't, not without cause, Tomas assured her, hoping it was true. I'm still a station officer despite my history, there are protocols. Protocols didn't save my father, the girl replied softly. The statement hung in the air, impossible to counter. Tomas instead focused on what he could control, securing provisions, preparing for various contingencies, planning their route to the docking bay when the time came. As station night descended, the quarters became a strange tableau of forced domesticity. Dion slept curled on a makeshift bed of spare blankets. Juno sat cross-legged beside her brother, watching over him with fierce protectiveness. Tomas offered Veda his bed, but she declined, choosing instead to sit beside him at the terminal as he monitored the situation. What happens to you after we're gone? She asked during a long silence. The question caught Tomas off guard. He'd been so focused on their escape that he'd given little thought to his own fate afterward. Discovery of his involvement would mean imprisonment at minimum, possibly worse given the political sensitivity. I'll manage, he said finally, Perhaps it's time for a change anyway. Veda studied him in the dim light, her copper-toned features softened by shadow. You could come with us. The suggestion sent an unexpected surge through him. Hope, perhaps, or simply the vertigo of considering a different future than the one he'd resigned himself to. I have responsibilities here, he said, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. To whom? Veda challenged gently. The confederacy that discarded you, the station that tolerates you. Before Tomas could respond, an alert flashed on his terminal. He leaned forward, scanning the incoming transmission. Captain Quinn has requested early docking clearance, he said, relief washing through him. She'll arrive in 10 hours, not 18. Is that good or bad? Veda asked. Good. Security will be stretched thinner with an unexpected arrival. He pulled up the docking protocols. We'll need to move as soon as she's secured, a small window while cargo is being processed. As they refined the escape plan, Tomas became aware of Veda watching him with an intensity that went beyond their immediate concerns. What? He asked finally. I'm trying to understand you, she admitted. On Palladium, we believed humans were predictable, driven by self-interest, territorial imperatives, hierarchical ambition. Yet you risk everything for strangers. Not everything, Tomas corrected, and not strangers, not anymore. The admission hung between them, weighted with unspoken implications. 3 weeks ago, they had been unknown to each other. Now they were bound by something neither could easily define, not quite friendship, certainly not romance, but a connection forged in shared defiance of an unjust system. My husband believed there were good people in every species, Veda said after a moment, even within the Confederacy. He died maintaining that belief. He was right, Tomas replied. There are many who question what we've become, who want change but fear speaking out. Veda's hand moved to her pendant. Then perhaps this information will give them courage. As station night deepened around them, Tomas felt a strange calm settle over him. For years, he had carried the weight of his choices at Nereus IV, the lives saved, the career lost, the purpose abandoned. Now, watching Veda keep vigil over her sleeping children, he recognized that perhaps his greatest act of defiance was yet to come. In 10 hours, they would make their attempt. Success meant the Nix family would carry vital truths beyond Confederacy reach. Failure meant consequences he preferred not to contemplate. Either way, something had irrevocably changed within Tomas Rivera. The broken edges of his past were realigning, forming something new, something defined not by what he had lost, but by what he might yet preserve. The station's morning cycle brought a flurry of activity as Captain Quinn's vessel, the Perihelion, secured itself to Halcyon's docking ring. Tomas watched through his terminal as cargo crews assembled, security protocols initiated, and the usual choreography of commerce unfolded. Each movement represented both opportunity and obstacle for what they were about to attempt. Status? Veda asked, appearing at his shoulder. She had slept minimally, just like him, an hour here, 30 minutes there, vigilance never fully surrendered. Quinn's ahead of schedule, Tomas replied, pulling up the docking manifest. Cargo transfer begins in 40 minutes. We'll move when the first shipment clears security. Juno approached, Dion's hand clasped firmly in hers. Both children had dressed in the clothes Tomas had provided, simple station attire that wouldn't draw attention. The girl had braided her hair tightly against her scalp, partially obscuring her Palladian markings. Dion clutched a small medkit Tomas had given him, seemingly finding comfort in the tangible connection to their protector. Remember the route, Tomas said, kneeling to meet them at eye level. If we're separated, continue to Dock 7. Berthsea Captain Quinn will recognize this. He handed Juno a medical insignia, his spare, kept unworn since his disgrace. Show her this and she'll know I sent you. We won't get separated, Juno stated with absolute conviction. Tomas smiled despite the tension. Of course not, but a good medic always has contingencies. As they made final preparations, Tomas's communicator chimed with an official alert. His stomach tightened as he read the message. All medical personnel are ordered to report for emergency briefing, he said, looking up at Veda. Immediately. A trap, she asked, voice low to protect the children from the implication. Possibly, Tomas admitted, or genuine emergency. Either way, my absence would raise immediate alarms. They exchanged a look of perfect understanding. The plan needed adjustment, but the goal remained unchanged. I'll go, Tomas decided. Make it brief, then return. We still have 27 minutes before optimal departure. Veda nodded, though her eyes betrayed concern. Be careful. Always am, he replied with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. The medical sector hummed with unusual activity when Tomas arrived. Staff congregated in the central briefing area, where Commander Reeves, a barrel-chested man with a perpetual scowl, stood beside Chief Medical Officer Harker. Rivera, Reeves acknowledged coldly as Tomas joined the assembly. How fortunate you could join us. Tomas maintained a neutral expression. Sir, what's the emergency? Harker stepped forward, her normally composed features tight with stress. We've received intelligence that fugitives from Palladium may have infiltrated the station. Security is conducting comprehensive sweeps, and medical staff are instructed to report any patients with Palladian physiological markers, particularly unauthorized admissions. Tomas's pulse quickened, though his expression remained impassive. Understood any specific concerns with these fugitives, contagions, weapons. Information, Reeves interjected. Very dangerous information, the kind that undermines Confederacy stability in contested systems. The commander's gaze lingered on Tomas a beat too long. Suspicion or coincidence? Impossible to tell, but the clock was ticking. Full cooperation from medical is expected, Harker continued. Commander Reeves has authorization for expanded search protocols, including staff quarters. Tomas felt cold certainty settle in his stomach. This wasn't routine, they were closing in. Of course, he said, mind racing. Should I prepare isolation units in case the fugitives are located? Already underway, Harker replied. For now, return to your posts. Report anything suspicious immediately. As the briefing dispersed, Reeves caught Tomas's arm. A moment, Rivera. Tomas stopped, forcing himself to meet the commander's gaze directly. Sir. Your record at Nereus IV suggests certain sympathies, Reeves said, voice low and dangerous. Sympathies that might cloud judgment when it comes to fugitives. My judgment has always been clear, Commander, Tomas replied evenly. Save lives first, politics second. That attitude is precisely why you're stationed here instead of commanding a medical frigate, Reeves observed. Don't make things worse for yourself. The threat hung in the air between them. Tomas nodded once, then turned to leave, mind calculating furiously. They knew or strongly suspected. His quarters would be searched soon if they weren't already. The original plan was compromised. He moved quickly through the corridors, using his medical override to bypass 2 security checkpoints. When he reached his quarters, the door was untouched, but that meant nothing. Time was critical now. Inside, Veda read his expression immediately. They know. They suspect, Tomas corrected, moving to his storage unit. He pulled out a station technician's uniform he'd acquired months ago for a contingency he'd hoped never to use. Change of plans, we move now together. While Veda helped Dion into a maintenance coverall that disguised his Palladian features, Tomas accessed his terminal one final time. With practiced efficiency, he initiated a cascade failure in the environmental systems 3 sections away, nothing dangerous, but sufficient to divert security attention. Ready? He asked, surveying the family that had somehow become central to his existence in just 3 weeks. Veda nodded, the copper pendant visible against her throat. Juno gripped her brother's hand, her young face set with determination. Dion looked scared but resolute, clutching both his medkit and the scanner parts he'd been repairing. They moved into the corridor as alarms began blaring from the environmental breach. Security personnel rushed past, focused on the supposed emergency. Tomas led them through service passageways, heart pounding as they approached the cargo transfer area. Almost there, he murmured as the docking bay came into view. The perihelion dominated the space, its weathered hull speaking of countless jumps through contested systems. Cargo drones moved methodically between ship and station, overseen by board security personnel. They paused in the shadows of a maintenance alcove, waiting for the perfect moment. Captain Quinn stood near her vessel's entrance ramp, arguing animatedly with a customs official. The distraction was ideal. Now, Tomas whispered, walk, don't run, stay together. They emerged from concealment, moving purposefully toward the ship. 20 meters, 15, 10, Tomas felt sweat beating on his forehead despite the station's cool, recycled air. Halt, the command cut through the ambient noise, stopping them just meters from the ramp. Commander Reeves stood at the docking bay entrance, flanked by 4 security officers. His gaze fixed on Tomas with cold triumph. Medical override for an environmental breach, he called out. Oldest trick in the manual, Rivera. Time slowed, Tomas calculated odds, options, outcomes, all inadequate. Then Veda's hand found his, squeezing once. "The children aboard," she whispered. "I'll create a diversion." Before he could protest, she stepped forward, drawing the copper pendant from her neck. "Commander Reeves," she called, voice carrying across the bay. "I believe this is what you're looking for." All eyes turned to her as she held up the pendant, its surface catching the harsh bay lighting. Even from a distance, Tomas could see Reeves's expression shift from triumph to raw hunger at the sight of the quantum storage device. "Take the children," Veda repeated, her back to Tomas. "Now." In that frozen moment of decision, Tomas felt something fundamental shift within him. 3 years ago, he had chosen to save strangers at the cost of his career. Today, the choice was deeper, more permanent, and somehow infinitely clearer. "Captain Quinn," he shouted, the free trader captain's head snapped toward him. "Medical emergency, these children need immediate evacuation." Quinn, bless her space-weathered soul, didn't hesitate. She barked orders to her crew, who moved to intercept Juno and Dion. Chaos erupted as security personnel surged forward. Veda broke into a run, not toward the ship, but away, drawing attention from the children. Reeves bellowed orders, splitting his forces. Tomas pushed the children toward Quinn's crew, then turned and sprinted after Veda. He caught her arm just as a security officer closed in. "Wrong direction," he said, pulling her toward the ship. "The evidence," she protested, "is worthless without you to authenticate it," he countered, positioning himself between her and their pursuers. A security officer raised his weapon. Tomas moved instinctively, medical training translating to combat effectiveness as he disarmed the man with ruthless precision. The weapon clattered across the deck, and Tomas dragged Veda toward the perihelions ramp. Captain Quinn stood at the top, coolly aiming a contraband pulse pistol at the approaching security forces. "Anytime now, Doc," she drawled. They stumbled up the ramp as weapons fire erupted behind them. Tomas felt searing pain across his shoulder but kept moving. The ship's airlock sealed with a pressurized hiss just as they cleared the threshold. "Departure protocols initiated," announced the ship's automated system, disengaging docking clamps. The deck shuddered beneath them as the perihelion pulled away from Halcyon Station with unceremonious haste. Through a viewport, Tomas watched the station recede, its familiar outline already becoming indistinct against the void. "You're bleeding," Veda observed, her hand gentle on his injured shoulder. "Occupational hazard," Tomas replied, wincing as movement sent fresh pain through the wound. "Mom," Juno's voice echoed down the corridor. The girl threw herself into Veda's arms, Dion close behind. "You came," the boy said to Tomas, his voice filled with wonder. "You really came with us." Tomas knelt despite the pain, meeting the child's gaze. "I told you I would." "But your station," Dion persisted, "your home." "That wasn't home," Tomas said, realizing the truth of it as he spoke. "It was just where I was stationed." Captain Quinn approached, her weathered face creased in a sardonic smile. "Quite the dramatic departure, Rivera. Reeves will have bounties on all of you by morning." "Can you outrun them?" Veda asked. "Outrun? No," Quinn admitted. "Outsmart? Absolutely. We'll take the deep route through the Carina Nebula. Confederate patrols avoid the radiation fields." "Where are you taking us?" Juno asked. Quinn glanced at Tomas. "Well, that depends on what the good doctor has planned. You've burned your bridges rather spectacularly, my friend." The question hung in the air. Tomas looked at Veda, at the children, at the pendant still clutched in her hand. 3 weeks ago, they had been strangers. Now they were his reason for leaving everything behind. "The evidence needs to reach the Galactic Assembly," he said finally. "And these people need sanctuary beyond that." He shrugged, then winced as the movement reminded him of his injury. "Let's patch you up first," Veda suggested, leading him toward the ship's medical bay. "Then we can discuss the future." As Quinn's crew prepared for the jump to lightspeed, Tomas found himself seated on an examination table, Veda carefully cleaning his wound. The children watched from nearby, Dion clutching his precious medkit, Juno sketching the scene with a stylus borrowed from a crew member. "You didn't have to come," Veda said softly, applying regenerative gel to his shoulder. "You could have stayed." "No," Tomas replied simply, "I couldn't have." She looked up, meeting his gaze with questioning eyes. He had no eloquent explanation, no grand declaration. Just the certainty that had crystallized in that moment on the docking bay. Some choices weren't choices at all, but recognitions of what was already true. "What now?" she asked as she finished dressing his wound. Outside the viewport, stars began to elongate as the perihelion prepared for light jump. Halcyon Station was already invisible, lost among countless points of light. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the monumental task of exposing truths that could reshape the Confederacy itself. Tomas looked at the family before him. Veda, her quiet strength finally unburdened by immediate fear. Juno, fierce and determined beyond her years. Dion, curious and resilient, already unpacking the medkit to help with Tomas's bandages. "Now," he said, feeling a genuine smile form for the first time in years, "we find our way home." The ship shuddered, stars blurred, and the perihelion leapt into hyperspace, carrying them toward a future none of them could predict but all had chosen. Not safety, not certainty, but possibility, and for Tomas Rivera, after 3 years of exile, that was enough. As the familiar disorientation of hyperjump settled over the ship, Tomas realized something profound. Home wasn't Halcyon Station. It wasn't the Confederacy Medical Corps. It wasn't even the planet he'd been born on. Home was the space you created with people worth protecting, worth saving, worth following across light years of darkness toward whatever waited on the other side.